Good morning. It is 10 a.m. on Thursday, October 24th, and I am calling to order this meeting of the Public Safety and Justice Committee meeting. Nancy, welcome. Let's begin with a roll call, please.
Good morning. Vice Chairperson Chavez
Here.
and Chairperson Allenberg.
I am here as well.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Excellent. Let's go right to public comment, the portion of the agenda set aside for members of the public wishing to address the board of the Public Safety and Justice Committee on items not on today's agenda. Do we have speakers?
We have 3 in chambers and 1 on Zoom.
All right, so let me just make a final call. We'll close the speaking queue before the first person begins speaking. Are we holding firm in
They're
both?
holding firm, yes.
All right, let's close the queue, and thank you for setting the clock to 3 minutes.
First speaker is Sam Brown. If you can please come to the podium. He will be followed by Mark Ashford and Paul Anthony Soto.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, one second, I had it written down.
Would you like someone to go first while you
Yeah,
get
go
organized,
for it.
sir? All right, let's have the next speaker.
First of all, I just want to thank each and every one of you for your service and everything you're doing for the communities. My name is Mark Ashford. I'm the co-chair for the San Jose League and also a co-founder and liaison for the South County League. We want to express our gratitude for the commitment, support, and practice that Javier, Charmaine, and Juan have extended to us in order for us to form the South County League. As we acclimate ourselves to becoming more accustomed to reading and understanding these processes, we look forward to being more proactive and involved. Thank you. Thank you, Javier.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sam Brown. I am also a member of the League and founding member of the South County League. I just wanted to express my thanks for the opportunity we have today to be involved in a positive way. I look forward to understanding better understanding the work, how this process works. Thank you. Thank you, Javier.
Thank you.
Good morning, Paul Soto from the Horseshoe. First of all, I'd like to thank the county for having resources available for people, for vulnerable populations, specifically with respect to mental health and drug addiction. I've been a recent beneficiary of those processes, and that's why I'm here today, so I just wanted to thank you for that. Secondly, what I want to talk about is the vulnerability of citizens in the community and those physical and mental vulnerabilities, them bringing them with them within the context of the jail, and then jailers having the capacity to use whatever it is that the county deems allowable within that context. I think we've had very clear indications that vulnerable populations such as Michael Tyree, William Leonti, who I'm going to speak about later, William Leonti, Juan Gomez, and Juan Nunez, and Andrew Hogan. So there's been a particular vulnerability within the jail system itself because all of these men have something in common, and they are all mental health recipients, and their systems, their being, their bodies are vulnerable. And so that's the common thread that is necessary, and I think one of the suggestions that I'm going to make hopefully will see to it that there is that barrier in order to make sure that the vulnerable populations are not the populations that are going to be the receiving end of a taser gun, because it's been used on me. I know what it feels like. I know how it just completely takes over your nervous system. I mean, you just drop like rocks on the floor. And so with that said, I think I probably said too much, segued in the other area, but it just feels good to be back, and hope to have an interesting discussion with regard to tasers. Thank you.
Next speaker is on Zoom, iPhone 56. I'm unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Yes, hello, good morning. I've been addressing you guys, this committee, for quite a long time now about my kids who are being sexually abused. I've been begging somebody here on this committee to do something to help my kids. I mean, one child is already confirmed being sexually abused. The other children are showing signs of the same type of sexual abuse. And I can't even get so much of as a screening for my children. A screening, a basic screening, when a child has reported that he'd been anally raped beginning from the age of 13, I mean, it's a no-brainer that you go in and you do a screening. But instead of anybody doing anything about it, the district attorney, Jeff Rosen, he's hell-bent on creating a different reality. And then, I mean, and he's doing this by prosecuting me and by raising a doubt to competency to stand trial in order to get a psychological evaluation that will absolve the person that he knows is sex trafficking my kids from any repercussions for doing so. I mean, it's a shame what's going on in this county. I mean, you can see what's going on in San Jose with the Omar Torres. I mean, he's getting excused absences after he's been accused of sexually abusing children, and now there's tampering, reports of somebody tampering with the investigation, the police investigation. I mean, we're turning into a pedo county, or a pedo sanctuary. I mean, why can't I get a screening for my kids? I don't understand it. I mean, why are you guys so callous? I mean, do you guys believe that pedophilia is right? That children should be subjected to sexual abuse? I mean, come on, you guys are supposed to be protecting the community and you're just ignoring me. I don't know what to say to get you guys to do your jobs. Just do your fucking jobs. It's disgusting. Each and every one of you who have heard my complaints over the last 2 years, that you guys just sit there and act like nothing happened. It's shitting. All of you guys. Thank you for your time.
That's our final speaker.
Thank you very much. Item 3 is approval of the consent calendar. I have a couple of comments to start. First, item 8, the August and September minutes. I want to note an error in the minutes for the September 12th meeting. The minutes failed to acknowledge that the motion for community engagement was targeted at the RFP for a custodial facility needs assessment. I've printed copies of the motion here for reference, and it looks like those are being handed out. Thank you. I'm going to read it as part of the consent calendar so we can vote to approve it here. The motion as recorded in the minutes was Chairperson Ellenberg requested that administration ensure that the community engagement process includes individuals currently or formerly incarcerated in county facilities, custody staff, survivors of harm, service providers, family members of system-impacted individuals, and community stakeholders. Chairperson Ellenberg further requested that administration consider collaboration with a trusted community non-county messenger to assist in facilitating the conversations. The motion that was made by myself, was actually as follows. The RFP for a custodial facility needs assessment should include an expectation of community engagement that involves individuals who are currently or formerly incarcerated in our facilities, custody staff, parentheses, correctional officers and others, close paren, survivors of harm, service providers, including programs, classes, and health-related services, family members of system-impacted individuals, and other community stakeholders. That was the end of the motion. Critically missing was the direction that the community engagement process be embedded in the RFP for custodial needs assessment. Next, item 10 on consent is to receive an annual report from the Office of Gender-Based Violence Prevention relating to the County Domestic Violence Shelter-Based Program Special Fund. The department had requested that this item be on the consent calendar, so I just want to take a moment to thank them for the report and the critical work that they are doing to provide services and support for survivors of violence. With regard to item 11 relating to competitive grants for the period July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2024, I'm keeping it on consent. I just want to make a quick comment to acknowledge the more than $13 million that have been granted to the sheriff and the district attorney to combat and prosecute organized retail theft. These funds, in alignment with the package of 10 bipartisan bills that the governor recently signed into law to address organized retail theft, will provide true solutions to a very real challenge. By contrast, Prop 36, which purports to address organized retail theft, will only serve to return us to the failed policies of the war on drugs, increasing our incarceration rates and doing greater harm to the community. Not only will Prop 36 not sensibly address real issues, it will create a new class of crime called treatment-mandated felonies. Along with SB 43 that was passed in the last legislative session, Prop 36 will undoubtedly overwhelm our system since we will be inundated with people with nowhere to go for treatment. There's a significant lack of substance use treatment beds and facilities across the state, including here in our county, even though we've been moving expeditiously to increase capacity. Both Prop 36 and SB 43 are unfunded mandates, so again, won't truly help us address the very real challenges we face. I'll return to this point when we discuss behavioral health bed capacity during item 5. And finally, just a note on the order of operations when we finish the consent calendar. I'm going to be taking item 4 after item 5, as conversation in item 5, I believe, could inform some of the recommended language changes in the ledge priorities item.
Excellent, thank you.
That's my motion.
Great, and I will second that motion, and I just wanted to add number 9. This is the Sheriff's Office and Custody Health Services quarterly report on grievances, and I really wanted to just acknowledge the real incredible improvements in terms of responding to inmates' feedback. And when we did the Blue Ribbon Commission, this actually ended up being an area of really high concern for people who are in custody, not ever hearing back or feeling like they weren't being heard at all. And so to see the improvement, both in the timeliness of the response, is really heartening. And I think really being able to break down the different complaints so that we have a better way of responding to them is really important. So I wanted to thank the sheriff, you and your team. Please tell them that it was on consent, but I read it, and I'm really excited about the improvement. And Dr. Luna, thank you for leaning in on this. I don't know if she's here, but maybe not. But just to say how much I appreciate that, because a lot of the issues really are around our medical services, and that really, this baseline is really going to help us see whether or not we're driving the improvements we know we need to make. So happy to second.
Thank you. Do we have public speakers on the consent calendar as amended? Or sorry,
There are
not
no
amended.
requests to speak.
Okay, thank you. Let's vote, please.
Vice Chairperson Chavez?
Yes.
And Chairperson Allenberg?
Yes.
Thank you, motion carries.
Thank you very much. We're going to hop to item 5, which is to receive a report from the offices of the County Council and the CEO relating to bail reform efforts and implementation of bail and release work group and ATI work group recommendations.
Thank you. I'm happy to be the one introducing this item. So in January, at the committee's direction, we came back with a very exciting opportunity to refresh the work that was previously done by the Bail and Release Work Group. with a set of recommendations on a couple of items stemming out of that bail and release work group research that are ripe for a refresh and a relook to see if we might need to evolve or return to implementing those ideas in some fashion. The committee recognized the synergy between the bail and release work group work and the alternatives to incarceration work that was done over the course of the last couple years. For the first time in April and for the second time today, we're bringing back a biannual update that combines the work of those two groups into a matrix. We're going to start today with a bit of a deeper dive into some of the bail and release work group items that we're excited to discuss with the committee. I have from the County Counsel's office here Mona Williams, who leads our office's public safety and justice legal work, as well as Sohail Vafai, who is another one of the primary attorneys on this project, and they're going to be presenting on two significant updates on the bail and release work group work, and then we will turn it to Deputy County Executive Keeley to talk about the ATI recommendation. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and ask Mona to begin her presentation.
Thank you and good morning to the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to present an update on progress relating to certain bail and release work group recommendations in the context of the county's decades-long work in the area of pretrial justice and bail. The committee has received the alternatives to incarceration and the bail and release work group matrices, as well as our legislative file, which encompass more detailed updates on the status of those work groups' recommendations. Therefore, I'll be presenting on certain information at a higher level and to ground our discussion and to respond to a request from the committee for legal updates regarding pretrial justice and bail. I'll discuss that subject matter before continuing on to discuss two bail and release work group recommendations, exploring the feasibility of establishing a restitution fund and a community bail fund. Next slide, please. For notable legal updates, our legislative file provides a more fulsome discussion, so today I'll just touch upon 5 key areas. In terms of what we're seeing from our California courts, we've previously reported to the board on the Humphrey case, which is a California Supreme Court case from 2021 that found it was unconstitutional to detain a person pretrial unless bail is set at an amount that person can afford, or the court finds that their detention is necessary to protect public safety or ensure the person appears in court, and nothing short of detention could achieve those interests. Now, in the wake of Humphrey, there's been a healthy amount of disagreement amongst courts on how to apply the case, namely centered around the question of whether a trial court can ever set bail in an amount that the defendant cannot afford. Kowalczyk, which is a Court of Appeal decision from 2022, held that a trial court can impose unaffordable bail so long as it first makes certain findings about public safety and the arrestee's likelihood of making court appearances. This case is currently pending review at the California Supreme Court, and it is one that we will continue to monitor in order to provide an update as necessary to the committee. A recent report from June that was authored by legal clinics at Berkeley Law School and UCLA Law School stated that given the disagreement amongst courts on Humphrey's application, its impact on pretrial detention has been minimal at best. However, in terms of pretrial services programs in California, that same report stated that these programs have led to a noticeable decrease in pretrial detention, and the report specifically mentioned the county's PAR program as an example of when independent pretrial programs can have a more pronounced impact on public safety and court appearances in comparison to pretrial programs that are managed by law enforcement agencies. That same report found that after the sunsetting of COVID-19 $0 bail policies that were initially put into place by the Judicial Council during the height of the pandemic, the pretrial detention population has returned to pre-COVID levels. Also, we know that in the public safety and justice space, questions of equity are very important and key, and so we thought it was important to highlight that the California Reparations Task Force has recommended that money bail be prohibited for pretrial detainees because its use disproportionately impacts communities of color, both in pretrial detention outcomes and in the setting of bail. And last, in regard to our legal updates, we wanted to highlight two bills that were introduced and could have had an impact on pretrial detainees. So Senate Bill 987 would have, among other things, codify the county's longstanding position that information received from pretrial detainees is confidential, and it would have allowed pretrial services staff to share a client's information with consent with certain service providers in the community. Senate Bill 1133 would have required courts to automatically review conditions of release for pretrial clients every 60 days to determine whether those conditions remain necessary. While both bills did not become law, we note them in case the county would be interested in pursuing or supporting similar legislation in the future. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to switch gears a bit and discuss the recommendation related to exploring the feasibility of establishing a restitution fund. As we looked into this question, we found that outside of California, about 6 states, including Arizona, Washington, and Pennsylvania, have counties that have established juvenile restitution funds. However, we did not locate any restitution funds in the adult context. For the juvenile restitution funds, we like to highlight one from our neighbor, San Francisco. Its juvenile restitution fund was recently established as a pilot program in 2022, and it's funded by private donations. The restitution fund, like other juvenile restitution funds that we're aware of, has a few goals that impact its structure, including timely payment of victim restitution and support for youth rehabilitation. So, for example, the Juvenile Restitution Fund in San Francisco requires that youth participate in a variety of programming spanning from educational, restorative justice, and job training in order to participate in the program. And this structure aligns with California law governing restitution, which requires in both the adult and juvenile context that restitution flow directly from the perpetrator to the victim. Therefore, if the county were to pursue a restitution fund, it could consider making eligibility contingent on a participant's participation in programming to ensure that there is a sufficient nexus between that participant and the satisfaction of their restitution obligation. Another topic for the committee's consideration is that given that there are models to look to in the juvenile context, if the county does consider moving forward with this recommendation, it could consider starting with a juvenile restitution fund. This approach could also lead to a broader positive impact on the community because in the juvenile context, a youth's parents or guardians could be held liable alongside the youth for their restitution obligation. And so a fund that would cover youth restitution would have the added benefit of relieving not only the youth, but also their family from being saddled with that debt. Next slide, please. Last, I'll discuss the recommendation related to exploring the viability of a community bail fund. More specifically, this recommendation was related to the goal of providing an alternative to the commercial bail industry in which a pretrial detainee could have their bail posted in conjunction with receiving supports and services offered to help them be successful during the pretrial period and get any needed treatment. In response to this recommendation, in 2018, administration and county council issued 2 requests for proposals in search of an organization that would be willing to establish and manage a community bail fund. However, we received no proposals in response. So at the committee's request, we have refreshed our research and efforts. As a part of that work, we spoke with 2 national community leaders in the community bail fund space. And what we heard from them was that given the bail fund model, which pays a detainee's bail and then receives that amount back to replenish the fund once that person makes all of their court appearances, there are some structural parameters in our county, namely high bail amounts and long case times, that would make such a fund infeasible. In addition, the organizations felt that partnering with the county on a bail fund wouldn't further their goal to encourage local jurisdictions to sunset the use of money bail. Given these considerations, we don't believe we'd be able to identify at this time an organization that is willing to partner with the county to establish a community bail fund. And I'll turn it over to my colleague Key Lee to give any updates on the ATI recommendations.
Thank you, Keely here. I think our focus today was on the bail recommendations. Happy to answer any questions on the ATI recommendations.
Thank you very much. I'm going to look first to members of the public for comment on this item, and then I'll come back to the dais.
There's one speaker on Zoom.
All right, last call. If anyone else wants to speak on this item, now's the time to turn in a card or raise your virtual hand. If the queue is holding at 1, let's close it there.
Okay, our next speaker is iPhone 56. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute.
Yes, I think the juvenile restitution fund, I think it's a great idea, and I think the county should adopt it. Because we're also going to be using it for restorative purposes, to make these children who committed crimes, to make them functioning members of society. But I'd like to bring up an important point that was brought up at the last Child Welfare Ad Hoc Committee, and they said that over 50% of the children who are in juvenile hall at some point had a report made about abuse to the CANC hotline. And I think that's important to note that, you have more than 50% of the children who are committing crimes, they've been abused. And I think it's even more important that we put money into protecting our children and our efforts as well. It's just not happening in this county. You could see it in other jurisdictions. You had Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. You had Puff Daddy. Harvey Weinstein. All these people are have been prosecuted or are being prosecuted because they have been abusing children. But in this county, it doesn't always happen. It happens some of the time when it doesn't matter, when there's no money involved. But when there's money involved, if the perpetrator has money, they can get away with it, and they can destroy all the children of this county. They can have carte blanche to do whatever they want. And that's because our district attorney, he's allowing it, he's incentivizing it, and he's covering these abuses. He's covering it up. And, I think that we should address it. Ms. Narayan knows all about this through litigation that I've brought against the county. So let's change this.
And that was our final speaker.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez.
Great. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you for the good work. And Kavita, did you start out as counsel for that work group? Oh my goodness. So that was the first work group I put together as a member of the board. And yeah, and there were many more after that. I apologize to all of you. One thing I wanted to say just about this particular issue is that the time has changed so much and the laws have changed in the state that I think the issue about a community bail fund is one that we should take off our to-do list and just accept that times have changed. And if times change again, perhaps the board will want to take a look at it. But I think our goal has been zero bail. And so, when we were first discussing this, that was really not in our mental horizon. We were more worried about people being detained for extended periods of time because they were poor. And I think the partnership between the district attorney's office, the public defender's office, and the courts have really done a very, very good job of addressing that. So for that one, I would just like to sunset it and perhaps leave a note in any future reports that explain that the conditions have changed, that we don't have an outside partner, but that we would encourage the Board of Supervisors and other entities, if this should arise again as an issue, to rethink that item as something that should be discussed further. Are you comfortable with that?
Very comfortable.
Okay.
Thank you. Greta, did you want to add in?
No, I was going to just agree with that. And I think, the amount of staff time and effort that would be required to invest in something like that, I think there's also a number of other really related and important endeavors. As you mentioned, the legal context is going to potentially shift again as we get a decision from the California Supreme Court on the case that Mona mentioned. So it also is a pretty challenging and dynamic policy environment to create a program within, given how much is moving at this time.
So that said, I do want to have a little conversation about restitution and thinking about this in the juvenile environment. I'm very interested in President Ellenberg and getting your thoughts, and frankly, all of your thoughts on the board. And I just wanted to share a little bit of background that may be of interest. When we put together the bail release work group, the issue at the time that we were trying to resolve was one of many people's belief that we were unlawfully detaining people for an extended period of time, and that we shouldn't be, and frankly, a disagreement with the district attorney's office over whether or not we should be. The beauty of that, I want to say, is that we had these discussions, and there were three things that I learned from those discussions that I was sharing, reminding maybe Kavita, but sharing. One was that I was surprised at how on occasion, there was not a strong understanding of each of your roles from each other in the public safety and justice system, meaning that people understood their roles really well, but were kind of a little surprised at where they were rubbing up against each other, and this came out in a public forum, and I thought in a really positive way, and people weren't defensive about it. So that was one aha. The second aha I had is that for a majority of the commissioners, and I think it's true here too, we had our sights on two goals. One was creating a much safer environment for our community and treating people fairly, humanely, and observing and protecting people's civil rights. And that also became there were times that created some tension. But the third observation I had is that there were so many good ideas that came from different parts of the organization about how do we, in fact, create a safe environment and do it in a way that really is healing, both for the victim and the person who committed the crime. And the reason I wanted to focus on that is that I think there was a lot of tension as to whether or not we were being victim-centered enough, and I think that's a very fair complaint that we got from the public. The issue about juvenile restitution, the group that leaned into that the hardest actually was the district attorney's office. And I think the reason for that, and I would be happy to hear more about this, but I think the reason for that was a recognition that we were keeping kids and their families in a system when they were maturing out of it, and frankly, not letting the victim have the experience and the healing experience of actually understanding that the juvenile was in fact moving on in a positive way with their life, and impacting the families with bills that may or may not assist them in moving their families forward. And this was very similar, which is why we were having a discussion about bails. One of the things that we learned is that the people who were investing in bail most often, moms, wives, girlfriends. It completely impacted women.
Women.
Yes, men. No. So that is all to make this point, which is that I am very interested in how we can pursue restitution, this fund, particularly related to a discussion that we had at our last meeting as it relates to rehabilitation and restorative justice practices, so that we could better understand under what terms and conditions this makes sense both for the victim and the perpetrator in a way that allows for healing on both sides. So I'm actually really enthusiastic about this, and I don't think we should necessarily wait for a private sector partner. I think this is one of those opportunities that we have to think through, and I think we should do it with people with lived experience. I'm so glad all of you are here, because I think we really should be talking to both victims and and perpetrators and their families of both, to better understand how we can use this program to tie together that restorative justice practice, and then be able to study it with people with lived experience to say, did this work? Did this help? And so I'm excited about it, and I would love to hear your thoughts, and our colleagues on the dais, your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I do have thoughts, but let me first look down the line if I see any lights on. If not, then I'm happy to weigh in. But truly, you all are working in this system every day, and your feedback really is important. Yeah, I agree with what you said about the importance of not only putting this into place, but really studying it as we as we're so fond of creating pilots. And certainly, starting with the juveniles makes sense, but I don't want us to forget about the adult population. I think there's often such a different approach to addressing juveniles, as if, hopefully correctly, they do have all the potential in the world, and somehow a few years later as an adult, we don't do that. And I think that we could take that opportunity to create really the first adult restitution fund, which I think would be tremendously impactful. I would like to explore what a pilot for a juvenile and adult restitution fund could look like locally, and would be interested in having staff return with a report back to that end. I would also like to plant the seed that really any proposed pilot should maintain eligibility for restitution for victims of nonviolent crimes, like property theft and other crimes that are actually more frequently reported in our county. I think we should be addressing what we are seeing. And I would really be interested in models that we could look at, as well as potential funding sources. So thank you for teeing that up. With regard to the community bail fund, I agree we need to put that to rest now and really think about how we get to $0 bail. And I think this is a topic that really warrants a deeper discussion. Historically, this committee has done 3 study sessions per year, and I'd like to calendar $0 bail as a full study session for next year. As part of that discussion, I think it would be interesting to get an analysis of the Illinois process to eliminate bail. What can we learn from that? And certainly, any and all of the departments that are interested in contributing to that report, I think would be incredibly helpful. Thank you for nodding at that, Kavita. And on the ATI and bail release work group updates, Key, thank you for the report. I understand in the interest of time, we make choices about what to go into detail on during the meeting. I appreciate the staff's recommendation to report to PSJC annually on the status of developing behavioral health service capacity and supportive housing for justice-involved individuals. I would like to include that direction in my motion, and in addition, have this presentation aligned with a study session to explore existing needs and challenges. As I mentioned earlier, and as we are all seeing, as much as our county has declared a public health crisis, set goals, really made some significant initial progress, we are getting so backed up in the courts and in jail, and really having much more detail on when the next beds are coming online, what the barriers are, if any, where we are with outpatient treatment slots. All of that is of critical importance to the collaborative courts, to our jail population, to our behavioral health service providers. And I think as much as we have prioritized it over the last 2 years, we need to go even bigger, even faster, with even more urgencies. And I know one of the pieces here also is workforce expansion. We've made some good progress, according to the report, on filling peer support worker vacancies, but we still have vacancies. I would be interested in having staff provide myself and my colleagues with outreach and marketing materials so that board offices can be proactive, frankly, with getting the word out on recruitment for these last 12 positions. On building a system that's mapping the service and capacity of programs utilized by justice-involved individuals, and the completion of a root cause analysis. I was, again, just reading the report, excited by the recommendation of completing that analysis to determine why programs that serve justice-involved individuals are persistently underutilized. That's sort of, I think that's a nut that we have to crack so that we can get more people into treatment. And as I'm saying that, I'm also fully aware that treatment capacity is so limited, and has to be really has to be expanded. So do you want to comment, Key, on that before I add a couple more thoughts here?
Maybe just a question, Supervisor. It sounds like we're to come back with a report, an annual report on kind of our behavioral health treatment and service system for justice-involved persons. Is that report coming back in the form of a study session? Is that?
So I think I don't think we need a study session here.
Okay.
Because, let me think that through for a second, because this is also part of the quarterly behavioral health, public health crisis reports that the board gets. That's not in as much detail, but I think maybe because of how integrated this is with the courts and with partners here, I think maybe we should do this as a second study session, and just to sunshine a little bit about the concerns that have been expressed around the size of the JAC list, the impacts of Prop 36 and SB 43 that are coming forward. We need maybe to have all of these minds thinking together and creatively about how we expand that access. And one pin that I'll also put in that Judge Manley mentioned to me yesterday was that there had been consideration, evidently at some point, although Judge McGowan wasn't familiar with it, so I'm not sure how far it even got, with looking at an outpatient treatment clinic, essentially, on the second floor of the Family Justice Center, where the Collaborative Court Partners offices already are located. So I'd like to get information about that, too. Greta, do you want to add in there?
Yeah, I just had a thought on the reporting question. I know that in a prior discussion at this committee related to in what forum would we make sure we were providing information to a board committee related to access to treatment beds for justice-involved individuals. We had said that in our, consistent with what you just said, Supervisor Ellenberg, in our future quarterly reports to the board, we'd make sure to include some specific information about that. And I think we can also consider including that, and I'm looking at Key now, in the regular reporting to FGOC that we're already doing regarding bed capacity expansion, to just minimize the number of additional reports kind of reflecting the same or similar information. But I would say that I am consistently hearing a lack of understanding on the part of a lot of our key public safety and justice partners about the really extensive efforts being undertaken by the county to do bed capacity expansion, and that's very understandable. A lot of the folks who attend certain items at board meetings aren't in a regular habit of tuning in to focus on our behavioral health quarterly reports and those capacity expansions, but we can certainly try and figure out a little bit more how we can do some information dissemination, perhaps in partnership with the court, to make sure that those judicial officers who are really interested in understanding how much work is going on to expand bed capacity get a little bit more information on that, as well as our partners in the district attorney's office and public defender's office, who I think aren't always knowing about a lot of the work that's underway.
So let me make 2 points, and then I'll come to you. First, even though from staff's perspective, you're making the same report multiple times, it's to a different audience each time. So I think there is merit. It's, I would think, not much additional work other than the time of the meeting to present the same report, whether it's to FGOC or the board or here. But I think all of the different audiences need to understand that. And I also, while of course I'd like everyone to be appreciative of how hard we're working, the ultimate goal has to be to reduce these waiting lists. So as long as the waiting lists are so high, and particularly the Jack list has been increasing over the last few months, it's, you know, to some partners sort of academic to hear that you're working really hard and it's slow to gain more beds. But I think what has to be part of that as well is specific information about barriers and what new strategies are being addressed. And one of which, and any of you, except Judge McGowan, can hopefully be helpful with this, the narrative from Councilmember Batra and Mayor Mahan, you know, largely shut down our opportunity to use the Monterey Bernal site for behavioral health services for justice-involved clients. We have an external grant for that, $8 million. There's another site, the Vermont House, which is also now receiving some objections. I've talked with that neighborhood group. I'm going to do so again. But any of you that are able to do so could to reach out to council members, to the mayor, from your perspective, talk about how critical this is. And with the expressed desire, I know Mayor Mahan supported SB 43 and supports Prop 36. If we're going to implement these new laws that require more people to get treatment, we literally need to have more treatment spaces. And I think it would be fiduciarily or financially irresponsible of both the county and the city of San Jose if we have to return these external funds. But it's a big deal. Every single expansion is a fight. So we could use your help. I'm going to go to Supervisor Chavez. Kavita, that's your light, not Casey's, right? And then Public Defender O'Neill, and who's the second light? Sheriff. Sorry, I can't see the depth perception of where the lights are. Okay, go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to go back to your point about adult restitution, and I'll come down the line. I think that is a really good opportunity. I also want to say that I think we know we're expanding our age from juvenile to adult anyway.
Yeah, right.
And so one thing that we might want to think about is how we deal with, people from very young age to 26, 27, 28, just so that we can better understand, again, the off-ramps from, poor decision-making or criminogenic behavior, so that we learn how do we really help while while these young people's brains are still forming. So that's just one point. I do want to just talk about the bed issue, and I just want to reinforce the point you raised. It is complicated and expensive, or it would be done already. So I think the point you're raising about it's hard is very right. I also think that we have not had a really good communication process by which to address the issues that are raised by all of our partners. So it's not like I can just go to a website and say, here's how many beds we have that are operating today, here's how long the wait list is. And I frankly think that is a big piece of this. But I want to just add one big complication. So one is, what's the communication strategy? Where do we all look to say, here's where we are today, here's how many are going to open up in Q1. We get this, we get the status reports, but this is not a static issue, it's an ongoing one. But the other thing I just wanted to raise is that I am very concerned that even with the RAND study, it doesn't reflect who we're seeing in the community that needs help. So as an example, when we very first opened up the reentry center, that was done in partnership with the city of San Jose, because they were complaining, honestly, that they did not have an alternative place to take people who were drunk and who didn't need necessarily to be in custody, and it was slowing their ability to get more officers out on the street. First of all, just I will poke fun at San Jose on this one too, because they wanted it and then it took them a year to use it because they had to legally study it, which I am still mad at them about. So there you go. But what I'm also curious about is whether or not the way we're structuring treatment is reflective of what people need. Because what I'm seeing is on the streets, and I live in downtown San Jose, I'm seeing more people with very, very significant addictions that are malnourished, and and I don't know how often people come in and out of their healthiness, but we do not have safe, locked facilities outside of putting them in jail. And we know they're expensive, those locked facilities, and we know there's a lot of tension in the community about that. But if, in fact, we are really trying to stabilize people, what is the appropriate treatment? And I'm not saying that I know the answer to that. What I'm saying is I'm not sure anybody does, and it's worth us thinking about who we're seeing on the street and whether or not the current design of our system is responsive to the needs that we're most seeing. And I'm not sure they are, and I'm not saying that in a critical way. I think what we're seeing is people living with much longer addictions, in part because we're doing a good job of preserving life, but people are getting sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker, and we don't have, I'm not sure we have all the places. So, I mean, all the appropriate types of treatment. And I say that because as we're thinking about any new construction, any new build out, I do think we need to make sure that we're being rigorous in our assessment as to whether or not that placement is appropriate for the person that we're putting into it, instead of just trying to put people in the right placement as we see it today. I don't think we should be afraid to say we don't know, and the laws don't help us, and they really don't in terms of helping us be strategic about that. But I'm just going to ask that we give that some thought as these studies and reports come back, because I fear that we're going to keep ourselves in a loop unless we just sort of say, this isn't working and this is what we need to do. And nobody here, I don't think, served on this, but when we did the Blue Ribbon Commission for the jails, a subcommittee that came out of that was focused exactly on this issue. And I raised this the other day, and Gabby was the only staff person, I think, that was consistent through that process, and really appreciate the work of behavioral health. But I also think that, again, they're kind of people who are in custody are on the lowest end, or on the streets are kind of on the lowest end of our service model, and at some point, that's also something we need to remedy. And I know we don't have endless dollars. It really is, I'm really asking for a better understanding of what we are spending money on, where we have gaps in services, and where we don't have appropriate placement, period. Say it out loud, and that way we can figure out what it is. So, and Gabby's not here, and she really has done a fine job, so I'm not saying this to be critical. In fact, I'm grateful to her for her leadership, because I think part of the reason that I feel so focused about this is that, honestly, it's a conversation that we had in 2015, and it's incrementally improved, but it's been so incremental that I'm worried that we're almost at a standstill, and especially based on the Jack list.
Yeah.
So anyway, some thoughts.
Sheriff Johnson, and then Public Defender O'Neill.
Sure, I'll go first. Just briefly, I just wanted to, when you made the comment about potentially losing the $8 million, I would hope that the stakeholders would also consider maybe looking outside the box. We do have beds in county property. It just may not be, by design, the perfect setting, but it may be better than nothing. And I do think there's an opportunity that we, even whether it's a sheriff's office or another law enforcement entity, could actually help assist with a diversion program rather than letting that money just go to waste. So I'd love to be part of that conversation.
Absolutely. And do you mean in lieu of Vermont, or if that falls through?
No, and I've started this conversation, and we've actually started having doing an analysis. I do think we have beds available, right? But I'm not saying a diversion program would be great at Main Jail. I don't even think that's a good setting at all. But I do think there's property.
Oh, you're saying you've got beds available in the jail?
Well, yes, there's bed capacity both in Main Jail and at Elmwood, and there's parts of Elmwood that I think could be converted to be a opportunity or an off-site diversion program. So I would just love to be part of
Right.
those conversations before this money, we just lose it altogether.
Absolutely. I would say that's a both and. I wouldn't want any member of the public listening to this to hear that as decreasing our need for the Vermont
No, I'm just
property,
saying
but
it's
as
a
an addition,
possibility.
yes.
It's a possibility, and it would not be, in jail. It would be
Gotcha.
by design, a diversion, transitional housing type of environment. So I would like to be part of that conversation. Thank
You
you.
are absolutely part of that conversation. You may be in charge of that conversation. Yeah, we will follow up. Thank you. Molly?
Thank you. Just two quick points. I wanted to thank you, President Ellenberg, for bringing up Prop 36. I think we are looking at a return to failed mass incarceration policies, in addition to not having enough beds, which we already don't have, but we'll have even fewer of going forward. We haven't really talked about the increase in both jail the increase in jail population as well as length of stay, because what are now misdemeanor drug and theft crimes will be made felonies, so people will be staying in the jail longer. And of course, as always, it disproportionately impacts communities of colors, Black and brown communities here. So I just want to thank you for bringing it up. And I know Nick and I were talking both about the restitution issue, but about Prop 36. We need to have a stakeholder meeting where we discuss some of this, and actually I think there is one next week. The other point I wanted to make was related to the restitution funds. When I was a juvenile supervisor a long, long time ago, and Nick and I were talking about this as well, we did a site visit to Utah where they had a juvenile restitution fund, and they would have kids in the system go to work at local parks, and they integrated with the local jurisdiction to make that happen. When we came back, there was discussion in the juvenile arena about how to operationalize that, and there were liability and transportation issues that made it hard to get off the ground. But I do think, just as juvenile was the leader in detention reform, it could be the model for restitution fund changes and implementation, which could then be replicated in the adult system. I think it might be hard to take them both on at once, and maybe Nick has some thoughts on that, but thank you.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Thank you. Judge McGowan.
The court won't speak to any of the policy reasons beyond this, but I do want to speak just briefly to real estate and your question of a treatment court located, or a treatment clinic located where we do treatment court. This is a premature comment, and I will not be the one to see it through to fruition, but while all of you are discussing this, I would like you to know that the court is considering and I've undergone some investigation into reopening our Santa Clara courthouse, because that is currently closed. That does have the capacity for both behavioral health and a clinic. It has the potential for several operating courtrooms, but it also has some problems. It does not have any operational holding cells, so it would only be a place. Personally, my dream was to move care court and treatment courts and things to the Santa Clara courthouse. Because of an elevator and the Judicial Council, that courthouse will not be available for reopening until 2026. So it will not happen on my watch unless it can somehow have a fire marshal instruct and investigate an elevator after it's made ADA compatible on an earlier basis.
We can make hard things happen.
Well, there's a reason I like to share at this meeting, but I'm just saying that has been a long-term goal. We have had informal conversations with some of our justice partners. It would require transportation and participation from the sheriff's office. It would require our public defender to figure out a way to have those served by them come to a different location than where they currently are. The building I recently toured is in need of some significant attention. We will not have the funding for additional staff, additional transportation, but with the onslaught of Prop 36 and the need to have some more drug courtrooms open, we don't have that capacity at FJCC. So it's something that may have to move up on the urgency level and will become a challenge for Judge Emity. I just wanted to share that that's what we're looking into, and that is something I think you all should be aware of.
That is absolutely fascinating and exciting, and maybe there are Prop 1 funding opportunities there as well.
Well, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your $8 million, but just wanted to get that out there.
I hear you. Thank you. Chief Burchard.
Yeah, thank you. And the discussion around Prop 36, I've been thinking about Prop 36 and the impacts that it's definitely going to have. It's an unfunded mandate, as most of them seem to be these days as they come to the counties. It will impact everybody here at the table and the courts, Javier's folks, based upon what they're asking, as far as it's not just drug treatment, but it's job training and things of that nature. We're going to have to fund that somehow. Because there's going to be a significant number of folks who are going to be put through this program. The jail will increase, and then ultimately there's going to be more folks placed on probation, and on the back end, if they do go to prison and come out, they'll be PRCS eligible, and they'll be with us as well. So I do think that we need to take a deeper dive in the impacts of this and what that might look like, and the impacts it will have to the Justice Departments here that we all work with, and trying to figure this out. We shouldn't wait until it passes and then try to figure it out. We should be looking at it now.
Sure. Well, if it's going to pass, it's going to be in the next couple of weeks, so that is now.
And it's based on polls. If you follow polls, I mean, 70% say that it's not a matter of if, but when, and then we're going to have to figure it out. And I think the impacts could really impact the sheriff and the jails and what that might look like, and how the district attorney moves forward with this, and what they're actually, and then the information that goes out to law enforcement. Do they bring folks in? Do they cite and release? There's so many different layers and variables that go into legislation that's not really taken and accounted for with the people who do the work. And so we do have to do that.
Yeah, and I think initially we should just at least tag an agenda item for December to take the pulse and see where we are. Molly.
Thank you. I'll be brief again. I just want to tack on to what Nick said, which is workload for every public safety agency is going to increase at a time when we're cutting budgets in the public safety arena. So it's really important to hear from all of us in what way it impacts our operations. It's going to be more work for Matt, more work for Nick, more work for the DA's office, more work for us, more work for the jail, et cetera, et cetera. So we should just be mindful of that. Thank you.
Just one other thing.
Please.
With drug treatment court, a number of years ago, at least in the probation department, we used to have roughly 300 to 350 folks who were attending drug treatment court that were on probation. Today we have 30. And so, and this is across the state. Drug treatment courts have moved away, whether it's not just drug treatment court, whether it's because they don't see the benefit in it. You don't have to go to drug treatment because in a year you could be removed from probation because of the laws that have changed. There's so many different variables, but I do expect this then, if this passes, this is obviously going to go up, which will impact the courts. There's just so many different variables I think we need to take a look at, and for us to now shift resources because we're going to have more clients that are going to be in those drug treatment courts for sure.
On behalf of the court, when drug treatment courts were fully involved, we had 3 full-time courtrooms, and we presently have 1/2 of one courtroom doing drug treatment court. We also do not have the ability to expand to add additional courtrooms, so Prop 36 to implement additional drug courtrooms would require us to close other existing courtrooms.
And I think you're thinking, well, where did they go? Because it didn't stop having drug issues. A lot of them have been moved into mental health court. And so co-occurring mental health, drug treatment, but there's still a specific number of folks that are not being seen in mental health court that are not receiving drug treatment services as well.
Right. And if there's a very long waiting list, it may be in their interest to just serve their time or get through the process rather than waiting for the treatment slot. This is a mess. There's a high-level comment for you. We have a tight timeline and a lot more on our agenda. This clearly is in no way a resolved conversation, but I will move receipt of the report along with the additional direction regarding reporting on the behavioral health beds.
Supervisor Ellenberg, I apologize. My question was actually procedural on the request that you made, if I could just pop in with that.
Yeah, please do.
On your request for the $0 bail topic to be calendared as a study session next year, I would just note at the Tuesday meeting of the full board, the board made a request for the primary criminal court actors, so the court itself, the DA, and the public defender, to report to PSJC on the impact that Dr. Austin's recommendations could have on the jail population, including reinstatement of $0 bail, the adoption of a trial continuance policy, and more efficient criminal case calendaring practices. So I wanted to
Let's
ask if
build
your
that all
intention
together.
is
Yes,
to
thank you
package
so
those
much for that
together.
reminder. It would have been my intention if I had remembered.
Great.
Thank you. Greta, final comment on this item?
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to make a similar comment on that, just from a organization of report back standpoint. And I also just wanted to flag and really give huge kudos to Key for, we talked about this money that could potentially be lost as an opportunity to invest in treatment services we all know are needed. And frankly, the pushback that you noted has been incredibly frustrating because we've hustled to do everything in the county's power to make sure those funds aren't lost, identified a great opportunity, and we have a very challenging timeline. So I can just assure the folks on the committee who may not be following the details of that conversation that has been pursued incredibly strategically and aggressively, and we do need increased partnership from our public safety and justice partners in really pushing for the treatment solutions we know advance public safety, because a lot of times it will be sort of the county writ large or our behavioral health treatment providers who are really the voices trying to push for that. And we do really appreciate some additional voices from our public safety and justice partners who understand from deep experience that greater access to treatment capacity, which we are making steady progress on in the face of those headwinds, is critical to safety in community.
Thank you. Will you second the motion?
Oh, sorry. I got lost there. Yes, I second.
All right, thank you. Let's vote, please.
Vice Chairperson Chavez?
Yes.
And Chairperson Ellenberg?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
All right. I know that we're going back to 4. I just wanted to take a quick look at where we are. We're fine, because I know that you have a tight stop. So, thank you, IGR team.
Good morning, Chair Ellenberg, Vice Chair Chavez, David Campos, Deputy County Executive, and I'm joined by our staff from IGR and the County Council. I'm just going to ask each of them to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Erin Evans-Feudum, Legislative Deputy County Counsel.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mary Hannah Weir, Lead Deputy County Counsel.
Good morning, everyone. Elaine Trin, Program Manager with IGR.
Good morning, Monica Tong. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with Intergovernmental Relations. Thanks for having us.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much. And we are here today to present to you a very important item, which is the legislative policies and specifically the chapter that deals with public safety and criminal justice issues. If we can begin with the next slide. And actually, let's go to the next slide. And when you look at the county's legislative platform, there are really 4 components of that platform. And this is a really critical one because it provides positions on a whole range of issues that in turn guide the work of IGR in terms of what we can take a formal position on, where we can weigh in legislatively, both in Sacramento and in DC. You also have the legislative priorities, which are items and issues, which I would imagine include some of the discussion that we heard in the prior item that should be priorities for us as we advocate on behalf of the county in Sacramento and Washington, D.C., issues like behavioral health reform, adequate funding for the county on a whole range of issues would fall in that. We then have the initiatives, which are actually the county-sponsored or co-sponsored bills. And just so you know, we are coming to the board during the November 5th meeting with our proposals on specific bills that we think we should pursue for the coming legislative session. And then the last piece of the platform are funding requests that we submit on behalf of county agencies at both the state and federal level. If we can go to the next slide. So the legislative policies document, which again provides the roadmap for our work, is divided into the 5 chapters that essentially reflect each of the policy committees of the Board of Supervisors. And this is a document that has been in existence for many years. And as you may recall, the last time that we came to the full board with this document in January of this year, we were directed not only to review the policies document for purposes of this coming legislative year, but to actually take a comprehensive review of the entire document. If we can go to the next slide. This document essentially has been a document that has seen mostly additions over the years as issues come up. Things are added from time to time. Perhaps things are deleted from the document. But it's a document that has never really had a formal review, a comprehensive review, and it's one that goes back many years. So what we have done is essentially asked all of the county agencies to look at the document holistically and to not only focus on the more direct areas of relevance to their work, but to also think of how other issues may actually impact their work and to also provide input on those areas. And this timeline gives you a sense of this very long process that we have undertaken, with the substance of the work really beginning in May of 2024. And this is where I want to identify and recognize the very critical work of our county council office, which created a legislative team that began the initial review. That initial review then turned to in July, and that happened in May. And then in July, we began discussions with individual departments to ask them to take the language, the revisions that were made by county council and provide their subject matter expertise on those areas. And we then proceeded to meet with those departments, and I think we had about 28 meetings with all the different agencies that included very detailed discussions of all of the chapters, including taking back and reframing the whole document and perhaps moving things around and identifying perhaps subjects that were not covered by the legislative platform document as it was. The one thing that's different in the slide that's up there from what's in your in your packet is that we are looking to go to the board with a final vote on the document in early next year, so January of 2025. And the way that we're approaching this process is that we're going to each committee, as we're doing today, for each one of the chapters, asking the committee for input and comments. And then once we have done that for every chapter, we'll go to the full board for a conversation. I also want to acknowledge that behind me are department heads that are here for the relevant section of this chapter. And again, just to illustrate the very, important relationship of all of the players here and making sure that we got the best thinking for the county in each one of these chapters. If you can go to the next section. One of the things that we did in the document is that we did provide a more comprehensive statement about general values, mission statement, core values for the county. We wanted to lay that out so that if anyone, looked at that document without knowing anything about it, they could see that this is what the County of Santa Clara is about. The edits in each section reflect changing priorities, a changing dynamic, and making sure that the document is really up to date. 5-10 years ago, as an example, artificial intelligence was not something that we were talking about. I joke, in some of the meetings that, this document probably says something about, electrifying the whole county, because it really goes back many years. We wanted to make it up to date as much as we could. We also, combined some sections, condensed some sections. One thing that was important to criminal justice, and I want to note this at one of the meetings at PSJC, we were directed to coordinate and collaborate with the court system, and we're very grateful to Judge McGowan, to Judge Emede for meeting with us, and we incorporated some language and added a section that dealt with the courts. And again, I'm very grateful for the insight and the partnership on that. We also added a section on the medical examiner's office. And you have I will note, close with this, you have 3 versions of the document that were presented to your office. The final document in its current form, a red line version that tracks all of the changes. And as you can see, many lawyers and many people were involved in that document. And then a third version that actually highlights some of the additions to the document. So again, our gratitude to the county counsel's office, to our team, but also to all the department heads and to the DCEs that oversee those departments who were very involved in this process. And once the document is voted on, it would also go to the Office of Communications and Public Affairs for graphic design so that it looks, pretty when it's finalized, and it's something that we can hand out as we're, advocating on behalf of the county. So with that, we will end our presentation and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. Do we have public commenters?
We have one speaker in chambers that completed a card, but there's no name on it, and one speaker on Zoom.
All right, the person that completed the card should please come down to the dais. Thanks, Paul. And but before you start, let me just make a last call. Is there anyone else on Zoom that would like to speak? Now's the time to raise your virtual hand. I'll close the queue before the first speaker begins.
And we're holding at 1.
All right, let's close it at 2 speakers, please.
Okay, Paul Soto from the Horseshoe. I really like the previous conversation because it has everything to do with this conversation. Legislatively, whether it be Prop 36, Prop 46, whatever the proposition is, that the county does not have the capacity to accommodate that. It just doesn't. That isn't up. And so because it doesn't, and these are lawful mandates by the state, then necessarily I don't really care if Mr. and Mrs. Joe Smith thinks, and they only think this, that their property value is somehow going to be impacted by placing some kind of program within their jurisdiction or within their area of where they live. Yes, we can hear you, but we have a legal mandate now. So we'll give you the opportunity to talk about it, but we need to really implement it and be about it. So that's really, and that's going to take political will. That's going to take really some ganas and some political courage to sit down with people and tell them straight up, this is how we need to do it. We'll politely hear you what you got to say, but ultimately this is the decision we're going to make because it's mandated by the state. Secondly, Sheriff Johnson's proposal, that I am in full agreement that maybe we can suggest maybe for the next legislative calendar to implement a program like that. It would function basically the same as the prison industry. Like, we have a lot of untapped labor there of a program that could be just like they do in the prison system. You know, like, for instance, I went to go get my glasses a couple of days ago, and my glasses come from CDC. The pharmacy actually accesses CDC in order to make my glasses, make my lenses. And these are public entities. So those are just some ideas that maybe possibly can be included within the conversation with Chair Johnson. Thank you.
Our next speaker is iPhone 56. I'm unmuting you. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Yes, I think it's great that we have a document that outlines all our core values and our mission, and also what our policies are with respect to recent legislation or legislation in general. I don't think that we're really doing a good job of that. I mean, do we have a core value that a parent who reports child abuse should be prosecuted by the district attorney's office? I didn't see that in this document. We already have legislation on the books against child molestation, but for some reason in this county, it's being completely glossed over. Well, not completely. I'm sure there are some prosecutions for child molestation, but I can tell you that my own kids are being sexually abused, and instead of protecting the children, they're trying to cover it all up and letting these child molesters have free reign over our children. I mean, I've also been retaliated against. I have another daughter with another mother, and she's in the legal custody of a rapist, a person who previously drugged and raped a teen. And she wanted to come to court. She came to court and she agreed to give me custody because she knew that the child was in danger. But instead of allowing me to sign a stipulation with this mother, the judge, she acknowledged that she agreed, but she denied my ability to get custody, legal custody. And that's just a shame in this county that we're doing this to children. I mean, that we're retaliating against parents callously and involving more children in this sexual abuse. It's just terrible. Thank you for your...
That concludes public comment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is tremendous work. This was likely an overdue redo, but I think the approach that the IGR team took that was so broadly inclusive of departments across the county and really just the refresh and reorganization, I think, has produced a real quality document. And I particularly like that you are thinking about how we use this as a communication tool as well as an internal policy guiding tool. I do have a couple of minor proposed language changes. I gave those to everybody.
Yes.
So that I don't have to read them all into the record, but just the gist is that the first one in the framework statement, bullet 6, I want to make sure we really are including all of the target populations that we need to be focused on. And then aligned with the conversation we had in item 5, I think we should memorialize that our policies, that the county's goal is the elimination of cash bail. And then finally, advocating for restitution for victims of all crimes, whether juveniles or adults, I think is important. And unless any of you tell me that there's a reason for the distinction in the original policy, I would recommend that the language be streamlined. And that would be a motion. Thank you. Any concerns with any of the proposed changes?
From our perspective, we don't have a concern, but I know that we may want to, ask county council to maybe look into that just to make sure, and I'm sure that they'll let us know if there's any reason legally or otherwise that we would have a concern. But this makes sense to us. And one thing that I forgot to note is that many of the folks sitting at the dais actually were really involved in this document as well. So thank you as
Great,
well.
then
for
I'm
your
happy to
input.
hear from anybody with concerns or anything else. Supervisor Chavez?
Yeah, so first of all, great body of work and very exciting. I wanted to ask, just as it relates to this committee, sort of two high-level questions. And one is, with the State Board of Community Corrections, which I forget what the, anyway, BSCC, which I served on. You'd think I'd remember all those acronyms. I never do. One thing that I had been concerned about, and I wondered if you could take some time perhaps to talk to the sheriff a little bit about, is whether or not the structure of that board lends itself to actively support change for local departments. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of rules and they've added some new people, but they haven't broadened their their scope of work and their responsibilities. And one of the things I'm concerned about is by bringing more people on who are not public safety folks, which I think is good, I think it's also giving the impression that body will play a bigger leadership role in the reforms that are needed at a local level. And I mention that because one of the people who has played a big leadership role in thinking about this has been San Diego Senator, amazing woman. God,
Tony Atkins?
Tony. And she had been thinking a lot about this relative to work she was trying to do to improve San Diego jails. So I just wanted to put this on the radar, that it's something that you actually may want to think about and CSAC may want to think about in terms of how that board could be a better ally to all of us as we're trying to make changes on the ground. And happy to talk to you in more detail, but I just want to highlight that because that's been on her radar, and I think she's really been thoughtful about change and reform in this area.
And I'm happy to look into that if it's okay through the chair. We'll
Please.
reach out to the sheriff, and the sheriff and his office have been a very important partner in this whole process. And I'll make sure to include our Deputy County Executive, Casey Alcon, who has also been helping us in this area for quite some time. So happy to look into that, and we'll follow up with you, Supervisor Chavez.
And then the other thing, you won't have to, lucky you, you won't have to, but the other...
I don't think that, I think phones still work in New Mexico.
And I'm excited that we're including the coroner's office, our medical coroner. I think that's fantastic. I do want to just say just more writ large about the work that you're doing. I have been interested in, LA always gets such special treatment because they're big and they're LA. And I know it's really, it can be just, annoying, disheartening. There are a whole bunch of words. But one thing I really wanted us to take a look at is whether or not we have the ability to pilot strategies through legislation that may allow for longer-term rule restructuring. So one thing that LA, I think they do brilliantly is they say, oh, we have a pilot and we're a jillion people, so our pilot now becomes something, that gets embedded into a whole body of work that frankly then impacts all of us across the state, whether or not it's something that is best for local counties. But the reason I'm asking this is that, and actually Sheriff Johnson and I were having a discussion about this morning, that as we're looking at whether it's rebuilding a jail or a juvenile facility or any of those kinds of facilities, and as we're looking at doing something very innovative and creative here and not just what everybody's doing across the state, whether or not it makes sense for us to look at pilot status for some of the construction and programmatic changes we want to make, because we are doing something different than is, I hope, different than our partners are doing. And the thing I worry about is the state board of, for the State Corrections Board, and also OSHPD and everybody who weighs in on our architecture medically, we get in line and we wait until we are having multiple birthdays. And one of the areas, and I'll give an example, is that O'Connor Hospital was trying to rebuild. This was when Senator Vasconcellos was still a senator, and he literally had to go to somebody's office to physically get plans and move them to another desk so that we could actually keep O'Connor functioning. I mean, so there's a lack of sense of urgency there, which is why I would really want us to think about if we're doing something unique and aligns with the leadership of the state, can we look at being a little more innovative in terms of how we're treated relative to these agencies? And I know that's a very big lift, David, but you've been so amazing. I don't mean to put pressure on you, but yay, but this is really gonna be hard, I know.
Well, we know that there's never enough to be done. There's always something new and something more. And one thing that I would say about our relationship vis-a-vis LA, which is actually a county that we share offices with, they're in the same building and we work very closely with them. One thing that we have is actually that I think that we can be more nimble, because as large as they are, it becomes more challenging for them to actually take positions on certain things. And so from our perspective, and this is how we try to present ourselves in Sacramento and in DC, we're actually the perfect candidate for a pilot, for a place to try things out, because we are large enough. We're the 6th largest in this state, largest in Northern California, but we're also, nimble enough. We don't have, 10 million people that we can actually make certain things happen more quickly. So I think we have that advantage, and I think that you noted a couple of those areas, and we're trying to do the same in other areas. You mentioned the coroner's office. I also just want to acknowledge Dr. Jordan, who was a very important player in all of this and a lot of feedback. We appreciate that. But we will keep you posted, Supervisor Chavez, because we know this is really important to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments before we vote on this item? Yes, Javier.
I just want to thank David and his whole team. They're very professional and just making sure that we followed up with the emails and notifications. So really appreciate that. And then we did just a few weeks ago hosted State Pro Tem McGuire and State Senator Cortese at the Reentry Resource Center, and your staff was very helpful in making sure that that ran smoothly. So again, just want to appreciate and thank your staff.
Thank you. And by the way, the Pro Tem McGuire was very impressed with that program. Your staff did an amazing job, and they're certainly trying to learn a few things and bring them to their district. So.
That's awesome. Thanks, David and Javier. Congratulations on consistently outstanding work. Let's vote, please.
I'm sorry, I may have missed the motion. Was that a
motion by Ellenberg, second by Chavez?
Vice Chairperson Chavez?
Yes.
And Chairperson Ellenberg?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Our final item on the regular calendar is item 6. So it's a report from the Sheriff's Office relating to efforts to address issues regarding disproportionality, including how taser use will avoid inappropriate impacts on local communities. And I'll just note as they're coming down here, well, I appreciate the sheriff and his team for trying to provide a response to the request by Supervisor Simidian. To me, it just seems impossible for this office to limit the disproportionate use of tasers on impacted populations within a system that literally disproportionately incarcerates people of color. So I'm prepared to listen, but that's all I want to say on this item. Thank you.
Good morning. Captain Tony Fernandez with the Sheriff's Office. Here with Assistant Sheriff Duran. I do not have a presentation, but do have opportunity to answer any questions that you have after reading the report.
Do we have any public speakers, Nancy?
We have 2 speakers online.
All right, last call for speakers on Zoom. I'm going to close the queue before the first person begins speaking. Are we holding it
And
too?
we're holding it too.
All right, let's hear our 2 speakers, please.
Okay, our first speaker is Paul Soto. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You have 2 minutes.
Yes, Paul Soto from the Horseshoe. Hello, Fernandez. Good to see you again. I want to talk about Jeffrey Leonti. And we've already been down this road before. And so it's kind of frustrating for me as a citizen and somebody that's been hit with a taser and somebody that's been incarcerated in your jails for this topic to come up again. I mean, Under Lori Smith's watch, while she was a sergeant, you know, this happened to Jeff Leonti, and the county paid out $650,000, which is in today's value would be $1.2 million. It's actually double. You know, so that's a good point of comparison there. But more importantly is that just we know who these tasers are going to be used on, and these tasers are going to be used on more than likely a vulnerable population within a vulnerable population. And who I'm talking about is PC mental health. When you're protective custody mental, and the reason why I state this is because of the fact of Jeffrey Leonti's issues. Now the coroner's office, in his case, he was tased back in the 1980s while Lori Smith was a sergeant and she was on duty. It was on her watch. And I would bet even money that it was D-Team that did it. Now, I don't know that for sure, but I would think that it would be D-Team because they were the aggressive one, and I'm grateful that they got rid of a lot of those cops because they had no business on the force, no business working in our jails. So I really want the discussion to center around Jeffrey Leonti. You see, because if we don't learn from the past, what are we? Do repeat it. And we can't, it's like how many bodies are you going to be comfortable with before you knock out the policy? So like somebody has to die? Well, guess what? Jeffrey Leonti already holds that position. He already does. We don't need any more murders via taser in order to let us know because unfortunately, Jeffrey.
Next speaker is iPhone 56. I'm unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You have 2 minutes.
Yes, I think it really is important to address the issue of disproportionality when deploying a taser. I mean, there's a lot of, we need to look at the bigger picture, right? I mean, my son, we were using these tasers against people who are mentally ill, right? And my son, he's reported being strung out on drugs and being suicidal, you know, because of the sexual abuse that this county refuses to address, right? And so, I mean, because you are refusing to protect my kids, there's a high likelihood that someday they're gonna be tased, or they're gonna have mental health issues, or they could engage in criminality, who knows? But you guys, right now, you're saying, hey, let's dump more money, let's deploy more tasers, but you guys are refusing to protect my kids. I mean, it's just, it's pure hypocrisy on your guys' part, that you guys are creating a higher probability of tasers being deployed because you're creating the issue. I mean, it's really terrible on your guys' part for you to ignore confirmations of sexual abuse. I mean, being anally raped, rubbing genitalia against the rectum, bathing with children, saying inappropriate comments about children. I mean, all these things, changes in personality. I mean, you guys are sitting here moving from item to item like nobody's said anything to you. I mean, don't you guys have children? Don't you guys care about children? Wouldn't you guys want your children or your grandchildren to be protected after being raped? I mean, what's wrong with you guys? Now you're talking about deploying more tasers? Thank you for your time.
That was the final speaker.
Supervisor Chavez.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the report. I do have a question that I'm not sure you can answer, but I'm gonna pose it to the group, and I know we don't have anybody from the county exec's office, but I think this is a question we need to really better understand. In a number of areas across the county where we have less people engaged in our system, overall, for example, we have fewer children that are in our foster care system. But as the numbers come down, it appears that the number for disproportionality either stays the same or increases. And I think it would be helpful to have a discussion without a specific subject so that we're not kind of impacted by how we think or feel about a particular system, to better understand why reductions are actually increasing disproportionality. And I can think of a couple of other areas, and but I'm saying this more, Susan, as you're thinking about what kinds of changes get made in the future, how do we better understand what we're seeing occur and deal with that level of granularity? Because as the numbers get smaller, it actually becomes even more apparent, and why that is the case. And I've read a few different people's theories, and I'm not a statistician, so they all seemed complex and unhelpful, but I would like it to be translated to more clarity for us at a future time.
I think that's an excellent question. Alternate defender.
Thank you. Look, I understand that this is a very difficult and challenging topic, and my comments are not designed to undermine the interests of security that I think obviously the personnel in the system needs, right? But I think the reason why this is so challenging is because when we are managing and trying to handle a population that is confined in a certain setting, and we have a tool that is available that can cause significant harm, including death, and we know that sometimes the instances of violence can occur disproportionately with our mental health population, because we don't understand that they're going through a mental health crisis, because maybe some of the tactics are not being applied. So I think this is a really concerning topic, because we understand the complexity, we understand the challenges, but the solution may not necessarily be helpful. The biggest concern too is that when we have such a dramatic application of force, there's no win-win, because then there's going to be distrust by the family member who has that person who's being impacted. There's the lack of trust then from others. And so I did want to voice the same concerns that Supervisor Ellenberg has, and I do think that the only way to move forward from this really challenging piece is then, I think, the Sheriff's Office is going to be willing to become more transparent and have a consistent commitment to transparency, and to have a dedication for training, so that we do have the application of this only in extraordinarily rare circumstances. And I think that could be the only way, is to minimize it in a way that is only extremely rare that it be used. If we don't do that and we don't take that approach, then we are going to have some serious consequences in our system, because there's already a lack of trust among correctional officers and inmates, and that culture shift hasn't really changed yet. So this may be just an added complication that makes the management of that institution way more difficult. So I would like to have us continue to have that conversation, so that this topic, while challenging, can still be discussed and see how it's being utilized. Was it appropriate? And also, frankly, I think if I was in your shoes, which I understand the administrative leadership challenges here. If I was in your shoes, I'd want to say to my staff, look, this tool cannot be applied in a way that is going to cause us to continue to have a negative impact in the way our community, our justice system looks at us. We are going to have to apply this for our protection and safety only when and if that is really the issue. Because if we don't do that, and we don't set a high bar early on in the training, not from a just logistical part, but from a moral and ethical values perspective. If we don't do that, and then we don't reinforce it with the scrutiny and the training and the protocol, and really, frankly, the strength to be able to discipline people that misuse it. If we do that, again, I understand the safety and considerations are out there. If I had my staff and I was in your shoes, I would have the same concerns. But I think there has to be that sort of, what are we using it, why are we using it, and are we doing it for the right reasons? And if not, can we stand up and make sure that we have some strong discipline when it's misused?
Thank you very much for that. Sheriff and Public Defender.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And I think, since we didn't provide a presentation, which we probably should have for the community as a whole, to bring everybody up to speed on this topic, this is a question that came up that really dictated this report, is when we were having the overall conversation of implementing tasers on a pilot program for possibly enforcement and corrections. And there was definitely a concern, especially if we were to have them in our enforcement in our communities, how we would prevent this disappropriate use of force potentially against a vulnerable population. At the end of the day, this pilot was approved for the custody bureau, which makes it even more challenging, to the supervisor's point, just because of the individuals that we have incarcerated. And to, really the community, this drive for us to bring this into the custody environment was not more for our protection, but it was to have the ability to protect the people that we have in our care. Because what we have seen, especially since I've been here, I don't know especially, I'm just sharing my observation since I came in 2022, violence in the jails has always been there, but there's been an alarming level of violence, and significant violence from incarcerated individuals against incarcerated individuals, where our personnel do not have tools to mitigate that or to even stop it. And some of those incidents could have very easily ended in the loss of a life. So the use of this tool, we're hoping, will be more used, and we have very stringent guidelines, and especially specifically in not having it applied to people having a mental health crisis. We're not even going to be deploying them on our acute wards or our acute units to prevent that from happening. So again, this is really by design and by policy, most likely during this pilot, if I were to speculate, is going to be used against the individuals who are assaulting other incarcerated individuals with sometimes weapons that have been made within the facility. So again, that's what we'll have to wait and see. But I would be really naive if I were to sit here and say it is not going to be used against again, based on our statistic, our demographics, it's going to be a very high probability it is going to be used against Hispanic population, because that population is the population we're seeing utilizing this level of violence against each other in the facilities that we're trying to mitigate and stop.
Yeah, but if I can just add really quickly, I think then the data collection is going to be extremely important.
Right.
Because then the data should be able to tell us whether it is being applied, and if so, to who and in what circumstances, and is there, that comparison in terms of disparity? Because, as Supervisor Ellenberg mentioned, sometimes we see that the data tells us a very different story.
Right.
And so I think I completely understand, and thank you for that clarification, but I think if you begin this process with that robust data set of like the baseline of this is what's happening, and that the way you collect it is going to be easy so that you can then come back and report, I think that will make a significant difference.
Yeah, and I think to your point and the importance of that, I think this county has set that up well in the last couple of years, especially our team in building out and really dissecting every incident that's occurring in our jails, our use of force report, our annual reporting of that information, and to your point of continuing to do that, have that open transparency, accountability, which we have all agreed that we would be very engaged with, including our partner at Oakland and OIR, who will be reviewing every one of these incidents if they were to occur. So,
Thank you very much. Are there other comments? Molly.
Thank you. I just want to say that having this particular sheriff here for this discussion is really important. He is trustworthy, and I know he works very hard to make sure he's working with OCLAM and CCLAM, and that's very good for all of us. I also think it would be really helpful. It felt a little like we started the conversation without much intro into it. It would be really useful to hear from jail staff about what's actually happening. I've spent a lot of time personally inside our jails, but I don't work there, and I think it would help paint the picture for this body and this committee to hear from you all what's happening. And to the sheriff's point about increase in violence in the jail, let's get back to our earlier conversation, which is when you have, anytime you have too many people in a place, whether it's a kindergarten classroom or a jail housing incarcerated people, you have more problems when there isn't enough room to move around and too many personalities. So we need to get back to trying to decarcerate our jails, make sure we're not keeping people too long, locking up people who don't need to be there in the first place, and we will have fewer of these problems needing less use of tasers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments?
I
All
will
right,
just make one.
please.
So we have a motion to receive the report?
If you make it, we do.
Yeah, okay, I'll move to receive the report. And the only comment I wanted to make is, first of all, I think this is a really great discussion, and period. And second of all, I do really appreciate the point that we're kind of coming to the end of a meeting, so you were being helpful with time, and we probably shouldn't skip when there's such important issues. It may be even worth putting it on another agenda. The last thing I want to say is I do think that, at least from hearing from the board, that there was a very high level of interest in terms of making sure that data is a very prioritized part of any step forward. And I'll also just acknowledge that I think the sheriff has really demonstrated an interest in understanding concretely what's happening in the jail, with an emphasis on transparency. And I say that because having been here, again, an extended period of time, seeing that continued direction and really seeing it move into the culture, not just yours, but even for the Board of Supervisors, I think is really a big step forward. And while we have different opinions about whether or not tasers should or shouldn't be in custody or in the hands of enforcement, what I am absolutely confident about is that the information that we get from this will make a big difference in the future in terms of how policies are made. So I think discussions like this are important, and they should be scratchy because, to quote Joe Simidian, which is hilarious. But anyway, they should be scratchy because these are important, and they're about values, and they're about safety, and they're about all the things. And if we could wrestle with those here, we'll do a better job of serving the public. So anyway, I just appreciate everybody's opinions.
Thank you for that. Not seeing further lights. Let's vote on this, please.
Vice Chairperson Chavez?
Yes.
And Chairperson Ellenberg?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Item
Motion carries.
7 is the Public Safety and Justice Department head and court announcements. And I will begin by announcing that this is Supervisor Chavez's last Public Safety and Justice meeting, and that makes me sad.
That's so sweet. And
But you have
yes, it
been
is.
a tremendous partner on this committee over the last 2 years. The energy that has been felt and the conversations that have been had all the way across the dais have been meaningful and fulfilling, and I think productive. And your partnership has made that possible. So I really want to thank you for the quality that we've been able to pull over the last couple of years from this committee.
Thank you. And, I appreciate your leadership in such a big way, both when I say President Ellenberg as just a leader in the community, and Susan Ellenberg when I say as a friend. So thank you. And to all of you, you are amazing, and I'm going to miss each and every one of you. Come, we're having a celebration on November 8th at Notre Dame High School at 5 o'clock, and you can kick off your shoes and eat some food and hang out. And I promise that I'm fighting with them about how many speeches, but we're going to make it this many so that people get a chance to visit with each other, and everybody gets chocolate. Yeah, that was my only request. Music and chocolate were imperatives. So thank you, and really it's been an honor to serve with all of you.
Molly.
Thank you. As you all know, I'm retiring very happily in December, and this week the board met and announced the appointment of Assistant Public Defender Damon Silver, who's here in the audience as acting public defender. And we hope to see him lodged in as permanent public defender, and that's a different process, but please welcome him. He's going to be terrific. Thank you.
He is most welcome. Any other announcements?
Just some
Javier,
quick announcements.
please.
So I want to thank Supervisor Chavez for her ongoing support of the reentry, and we had a chance to sit down and do a podcast. So we'll be releasing that podcast shortly in the next few weeks. And just quick two announcements. One, we heard from Mark and Sam, two of our exceptional lived experience advisory board members, and so it's a group of 17 passionate individuals that we convene monthly, and we really want to go from the informing them of information, consulting, to collaborating, but most importantly, co-leading efforts so they could be part of the decision making. So that's something that they want to learn, and they'll be convening other Bay Area advisory boards next year, which will be very powerful to kind of learn what other advisory boards are doing. And then lastly, I want to remind folks that you still have an opportunity to register for the Rise Up and Run 5K, which is happening on Saturday, October 26th at Halyard County Park. You could go on our website, and we're happy to welcome again former Sheriff Lieutenant Adam Duran, who will MC the event. He's the author of Live Life on Purpose and an avid runner. So he'll be there to get us going with a great warm-up. And then there are some departments that are competing with each other. So for the freedom fighters, all the public defenders, they're at 41, but the CEO champs are at 27. So they're nearing taking over first place. So we're at 428 registered participants. We want to get to 500 by Saturday. So thank you.
Outstanding, thank you. I don't see any other lights. Contrary to what is stated on the agenda, we're adjourning now to our next regular meeting, which will be Friday, December 13th. The formal cancellation notice for the November meeting will be posted shortly due to the fact that we will not have quorum. With that, we are adjourned.